You see a pair of laughing eyes, and suddenly a sighing sighs. You're thinking nothing's wrong, you string along, boy, then snap. You're hooked, you're cooked, you're caught in the tender trap.
In Australia, we're habitual gamblers. People will come and gamble every day. Playing, just push button, 25 lines. They're here for entertainment.
The Pokies. In just over 50 years, they've gone from being illegal to being everywhere. Over 200,000 machines are spread through our cities, suburbs and country towns. We keep playing and we keep losing. $12 billion a year.
Sometimes I just want to reach out to slot machine players and say, wake up, why are you playing this thing? It's stealing your money.
So what is it that keeps people playing? We'll go behind the bright lights and ask, is it us or the machine? You may think that people play the pokies to win a jackpot, but your chances of winning are worse than nearly any other form of gambling. So are poker machines delivering something else?
Slot machines have been called the crack cocaine of gambling, electronic morphine.
I was in a haze for nearly 20 years.
With the help of modern neuroscience and a maths wizard, we ask, have designers created the perfect addiction machine? Even the earliest poker or slot machines seem to exert a strange power to separate people from their money. One-armed bandits. Invented in the USA, by the 1930s, they were banned in every state there, except Nevada. But there was one other place that declared them legal. In 1956, New South Wales, Australia. Community and sporting clubs were given the exclusive right to operate pokies, and soon they were rolling in cash.
There's dancing several nights a week, and squash, golf, and snooker.
Many of these clubs have evolved into something entirely different. Mini casinos dotted across our suburbs.
We've grown. We have approximately 7 restaurants, retail, conferencing and events. We do try to be a 5-star venue. Our furniture and fittings are all designer, and 332 gaming machines.
For decades, a New South Wales club was the only place in Australia you could play a poker machine. And a Sydney-sider, Len Ainsworth, became one of the largest pokie manufacturers in the world.
What's the attraction of these things? Why do people play them and like them?
Well, you can win on a poker machine.
You can win on a poker machine?
Oh, yes, of course you can.
If you've got the method, the system?
No, it's not a matter of that. It's a case of you get back 90% of your stake on average, and if you happen to strike a winning run, you can be a long way ahead. But, of course, that's the time to withdraw.
So your advice to the poker machine player would be know when to stop?
Know when to stop, yes.
I decided on politics, still working as a psychologist, and I so enjoyed influencing policy. We'd been lobbied as members of Parliament for years by poker machine manufacturers wanting to bring them in. I was the government whip, so I ended up speaking on it in favour. Everyone felt great relief at the state not being broke anymore.
In the 90s, the floodgates opened, with poker machines going into pubs and clubs in every state, except Western Australia.
Over time, when we were playing rock and roll around the pubs, you'd see more and more poker machines coming into the hotels, funneling of people in, cha-ching, cha-ching.
So how much money you got to spend today? Let's have a look at it. Oh, that's terrific.
Rivers of money poured into state treasuries. Governments became addicted to the revenue. We'd become a Pokie nation.
No one was marching in the streets demanding the right to play poker machines. In fact, quite the opposite was the case. Somewhere between 3/4 and 80% of the population think the poker machines need to be reined back.
When pokies came in, people who were in my church who didn't have any addiction problems suddenly were telling me stories of how they were spending far too much money. Some committed crimes, lost businesses, lost marriages, lost homes, and I remember thinking, what is this?
The modern poker machines were a far cry from the early mechanical models. Transformed by the introduction of video screens and the computer chip, the reels had become virtual, keeping the fantasy of spinning reels, but putting the odds and a toolkit of tricks with designers. Coins became notes, or even cashless tickets. They were much faster than any other type of gambling. Buttons let you bet every 3 seconds, up to $10 a spin, or $1,200 in an hour. In other countries, such high-intensity machines are usually confined to casinos. Here, they were in the local pub.
In the early 90s, I would go to these big gaming expos in Las Vegas, and it was the Australians were really the kings of the floor. And it was Aristocrat, and they really had the presence of aristocrats because everyone was sort of following them around. They designed these incredibly complex machines where you don't really know if you're winning, these multi-line machines.
And what's the secret of the company's success?
Oh, I think building a better mousetrap.
My mum called me lucky all the time. She said I was just the luckiest person ever. When I was 18, I won 50 grand in a scratchy thing. And so that sealed it for me. I was just definitely lucky. And I bought a house, and that's the house I lost. I was really, really a good mother. Then the divorce happened and it was all just over. Unfortunately, the pokies were there on the weekends when I didn't have my children, and I wasn't alone, you know. I could dress up and feel like I was going out. I had cigarettes, had a glass of wine. I put my legs, you know, there where the machine is, and I thought it was paradise. But this preoccupation took over everything, like everything. Before I knew it, I was sort of trapped in there. I haven't played now for 10 years, and I run the Pokies Anonymous group.
There's around 200,000 Australians who struggle with these machines. They're the backbone of the pokie industry, providing 60% of its profits. What's in these machines that can have such a hold on people? The industry in Australia is highly secretive. So we visited the slot machine's spiritual home, Las Vegas. Tucked away in the back streets, a slot machine creator was happy to talk.
I've been in the gaming business for about 25 years. We are the creators. We're kind of kids that never grew up. I'm 55 and I play at least 2 hours of Xbox a day. At least. So in this case, this game that we're seeing here is titled Super Chicken for bars and taverns along Chesapeake Beach, Maryland. And behind, very near Chesapeake Beach, it's kind of a rural farm area. So we came up with an idea to create a game based on a chicken, a super chicken. It's not Superman, it's not a chicken, it's Super Chicken. And basically it's got a lot of plucking, it's got a lot of, the bonuses are based on the hatching of baby chicks. There needs to be something that pulls them to the machine. And that's what the graphics are.
They're animated now. They'll actually put their arms out and things and make sounds like all these weird, really amazing sounds. And the game, they'll just be sitting back going, oh, man, this is incredible.
Images of adventure stories, like there's the Arabian steeds, there's pyramids, there's, you know, those childhood stories. They were so adventurous that we read. They appeal to the child, inner child.
I started in Australia working for Aristocrat, and I ended up here in Vegas 3 years ago. I tend to think of the games as like little movies, little stories, because it is kind of like a film in that you have this, you just have one scene though that kind of plays over and over again. I really, like a strong character in a game, a strong pair of eyes. In that moment where you're kind of deciding which game you're going to play, my character staring right at you might make you stop for just that moment. So it's like the latest and greatest from our studio. It's got a really nice kind of Australian desert iconography and the Queensland Blue catalogue, and it's got that Lonely Man on the Desert Road kind of vibe to it.
When I was 17, a friend of mine took me down to the local RSL club. Didn't really think anything of it. I just went in and put a couple of dollars in, and yeah, the first time I ever played them, got a feature.
Whenever the card comes across like that, it means that something good's going to happen too. And then you hit the nitro. What comes through and smashes through the screen.
Lights, good, everything was happy. And then, yeah, the money sort of started going up and up and up. And it's just like a doot, 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 doot. Like shouting out at you that there's money on the way.
I composed music for poker machines and did that for about 5 years. You want to keep the player's attention on the machine. You don't want them to become too mindful and start thinking about things at home and maybe negative things are happening in their life. Obviously, some people have the problems with gambling. There might be guilt associated with it or whatnot. You could redirect that with some positive music that is more of an escape for them. Everything's in major key, so happy sounding. If you lose, there'll be no sound because you don't want to reinforce that you've lost. So there won't be a bipper or... The winning sounds, coins, people cheering at the end. They feel good about what they've done and they keep plugging away.
In the 19th century, Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov discovered something extraordinary. If you played a metronome or bell every time you fed a dog, before long, the sound alone would make the animal salivate.
It associates reward with a particular sound, and poker machines do exactly the same thing. And if you look at a big poker machine venue where there are hundreds of machines, bells and whistles going off all the time. And this partly explains why big venues make much more money per machine than smaller venues. Reinforcement is almost constant.
In Ontario, Canada, Dr. Kevin Harrigan has pioneered research into our biological responses to poker machines.
She has a very nice, clean heart rate, so we like that.
These electrodes, they're just recording your finger sweat, which allows us to get a measure of kind of how excited you are.
The first thing that popped out at us was, so the machine is constantly emitting positive sounds. Even if you put a $20 bill in the machine, it almost sounds like you win. It goes, ta-da! You know, incredibly, you're winning something in almost every second spin. If the manufacturer did that too much, then the manufacturer would lose money. So the question arises, how do they manage to give so many wins? And that is through what we call losses disguised as wins. So many of your wins on modern slot machines are in fact net losses. So you wager $1 and you win back 30 cents, let's say. So you have a net loss of 70 cents. But the machine celebrates that 30-cent win with graphics and sound. Now that was a big win. That was a loss disguised as a win. We got a nice elevated response for that. Interestingly, we find you get the bodily reaction that is telling you that you're winning a lot.
These machines work on even deeper levels of our brain. In the 1950s, American psychologist B.F. Skinner observed animal behaviour to try and understand human behaviour. He trained a rat to press a lever for food pellets. If it received them at regular intervals, it would only press when hungry. But if the food was given randomly, if the rat never knew when it was coming, it would press the lever again and again and again. It worked on pigeons, and it worked on humans too.
There is a good example of how you can move from the pigeon to the human case, because one of the schedules which is very effective is the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices.
In Skinner's day, rewards were decided by where the mechanical reels stopped. But since virtual reels took over, where the reels stop is in the hands of designers.
If we took the Super Chicken game as the player will see it and superimpose the math over it, this is actually the game being played. I could remove the graphics, remove the sound, and allow a player to play an Excel spreadsheet, and the outcome will be the same, except it's not going to be fun. We don't share math. The heart of a game is math, and that's our product.
No matter what your job is, whether it be designing slot machines or cutting grass, I really think you should take pride in what you do and do the best job possible. My name is Mike Shackelford, but I'm more commonly known as the Wizard of Odds. The big slot machine companies have big math departments. There's a very small number of people that freelance like me. I am looking at a game that I titled Golden Chariots. It's my understanding that Marcus, the client, reskinned it to a game called Super Chicken, but the theme of the game is not important to me. It's the actual math and the design of the game. Here's the reel strips. The way it works is the game will pick a random number from 1 to 128 for each reel. There's 128 to the 5th power ways that the reels could stop. Let's say that the random number for reel 2 is 65. Then it will stop with the bonus symbol in the middle with a harp above it and a helmet below it. If you get at least 3 bonus symbols, you're going to win free spins.
The mathematician rewards the player enough to keep them playing, while making sure the machine comes out ahead, according to a calculation called the return percentage.
Slot machines are set to only return about 90% of your money, so with every bet you make, you're giving 10% to the house, which is a lot. And of course, in the short run, anything could happen. You could lose a lot more, or you could win a lot more. But the way the laws of mathematics are, over the long run, the closer it will get to this return percentage. How do slot machines compare to other forms of gambling? Other forms generally are much better. The best bets in the casino are craps, blackjack, and video poker.
The house take on most casino games is an average of 1 to 2%, but on poker machines, it's around 10 to 13%.
When I design a slot machine, one question I always ask if I'm not directly told is, what return percentage do you want this game set to? And usually the client will give me a number, say 93%, but sometimes they're not sure, and I will have to consult with them a little bit and say, well, do you want to shear the sheep or do you want to slaughter the sheep? And if they say, we want to slaughter it, then I might say, okay, well, let's set it to 85%. No, and if they say, no, we just want to shear the sheep and keep them coming back, then I'll say, well, how about 95% or even 97%? And in Australia, they're all pretty much set to between 85 and 92%, and that's just awful. I have such pity for the people that play them because I know what an awful bet they are, because I've designed hundreds of these games. I mean, I'm sorry, but they're just a lousy bet.
Although it's the highest house take by far, if a player only lost 10% of their money when playing poker machines, it would not be ruinous. But the trouble is, if you keep playing, you lose all your money. Let's say you put in $100. Even after wins along the way, the machine is eventually programmed to return you $90. You've now got $90, and the machine is programmed to return you 90% of that, $81. With $81, you'll end up with $73, and so on, until you've lost your last dollar.
The house will win. The more I play, over time, the less I'll win. If I go out today and play, I may win. If I play every day, I will lose. There's no chance. It's just built that way.
I wouldn't be able to tell you how much money I've lost. I'd say easily over $100,000, easily. And the figure would probably be even bigger.
You always think that the machine's going to be your friend that night and it's going to be on your side. You can't get away when you win. Even if I had $1,000 in a machine, I couldn't take half of it out and go and do some shopping or anything, or put some petrol in my car. I'd sit there. I couldn't get away. I'd sit there until it was all gone. I would play for as long as I could.
Something that really surprised me early on in my research is this thing I kept hearing from the gamblers, which was, it's so strange, but sometimes when I win a jackpot, I get really tense, I get frustrated, I get irritated. And I said, why? How do you make sense of that? And they said, well, because the real reason that I'm sitting there is to just keep playing.
In the 1950s, researchers James Olds and Peter Milner inserted an electrode into a region of a rat's brain that was subsequently dubbed the pleasure centre. Rats could self-administer an electrical current to the region by pressing a lever. The sensation was so pleasurable, they would endure the pain of an electrified grid to get their charge. The rat ignored food and drink and kept pressing the lever until it died of exhaustion. Until this experiment, no one had imagined that stimulating a part of the brain could override the will to live. It would be decades before we understood the powerful brain chemical driving this behaviour. In the early 90s, Wolfram Schultz made key discoveries about dopamine.
I don't see much of a difference between human brains and animal brains. Human behavior is simply the expression of what we need to do in order to survive.
Measuring dopamine in monkeys, Wolfram's team had a revelation.
We were sitting around the laboratory. We had a little food box in front of the animal, and we showed a little piece of apple, and suddenly the neurons were going wild.
The feel-good chemical dopamine was signalling a reward to the brain. But when the monkey realised the treat was on its way, the dopamine neurons stopped firing.
If they knew the reward was coming, nothing happened. But when we gave the reward, suddenly, without any prediction, they went ballistic. Dopamine neurons went totally ballistic.
The key is surprise. And just as with Skinner's rats, unpredictability. With poker machines, our dopamine neurons struggle to predict reward, to find the pattern, to decode the logic of luck.
It's in people's, very nature to just look for things occurring in a certain order. I think one of the things that happens with slot machines, it is random and truly random, but there does appear to be patterns that show up.
I used to tell myself, I'm not going to have any chance of winning until I get no Indians whatsoever. Sometimes I used to have to wait for 20, 30, 40 spins, and I'd be going like, so there's all this mental stuff going on, like, okay, so now I've got that. Yeah, I must be at a bit. That can't be too far off.
When I play a slot machine, I will probably use my human innate tendency to try to figure out a pattern. There's no pattern in slot machines, and the dopamine neurons will be more active the less of a pattern there is. All drugs of addiction increase the release of dopamine neurons. So if you stimulate the dopamine neurons, you're already halfway into the direction of addiction.
Some people have a hard time grasping that a machine could be addictive. They associate addiction with substances that are inhaled or put into the body. But the fact is, most contemporary neuroscientists can tell you things like gambling and these process addictions are being taken as a purer form of addiction because they show us a direct window into the chemical changes happening in the brain.
Yeah, I had no idea that I could get hooked to start with when I first started playing them. I just thought it was a casual thing that you could do, just go in and play them. Like I'd seen them when I was running around as a little kid and never thought anything of them. And I don't know why I liked it.
Some people will be more prone for addiction than other people are, just like as there are people with blue eyes and gray eyes. I mean, that's just a natural variation in the color of the eyes. Some individuals may release more dopamine, or they have more postsynaptic neurons that are more sensitive to dopamine, or they have a stronger learning mechanism that could explain why they get addicted.
You go back again the next day because you need that feeling again. I know sometimes I was so desperate to put that first dollar in, you'd be shaking until you got that money into there and then it would start.
It was the MRI that finally allowed us to look deep inside the brain to the nucleus accumbens, where dopamine is produced.
We wanted to see the reward system in humans, given that it had been heavily implicated in animals as being fundamental for their kind of addiction-like behavior.
To see dopamine in action, Hans and his team devised an experiment where cocaine was given to an addict.
Where you see red and a little dot of yellow, that is right on the nucleus accumbens.
But dopamine was not just released when the cocaine reached the brain.
We saw the nucleus accumbens, this core reward system, turning on for anticipation.
Dopamine was stimulated not just by an unexpected reward, but also by the anticipation of it.
The question arose, what other things besides drugs might turn on this system? Could we see the system turn on in a game of chance?
In the next experiment they devised, subjects gambled on the spinner.
And none of us predicted that cocaine addicts anticipating a cocaine infusion looked exactly like healthy control subjects anticipating a monetary win. So anticipation is actually really fundamental to your experience of reward. What you are doing when you have a slot machine is actually kind of repetitively going through this experience of anticipation. You're like a rat that's sitting there key pressing to get a little jolt of electricity in your reward system.
This dopamine that gets released in the anticipation stage of the game has been incorporated into the design of the machines.
So when we started to look at the slot machine games, we really got a bit lucky, I think. We were able to get some design documents. The first thing that we saw just floored us is what people commonly call a near miss. The jackpot symbol, and then the jackpot symbol just above or below the pay line. So you're seeing it in the first reel, good. You're seeing it on the second reel, good. And then, darn, didn't see it on the third reel. It gets those, it's like, ah, shucks.
I'm silly for gambling, but I'm not silly when it comes to certain things. Like, I see the sequences that come up on these things all the time, and it's always one missing here, one missing here, one missing where you need it, or it's always like that, always.
The manufacturers create near misses up to 12 times more often than it would happen by chance alone. In other games, you couldn't weight things like that. If you go to a dice game, then the dice has to be fair. If you go to a card game, you know, there has to be 13 and 4 suits. Who sat around a boardroom table and said, we're going to allow these things to happen?
I think that it's unethical to overly tease the player with near misses. And all of the games that I design, unless I'm specifically told not to, have independent reels. Sometimes I get asked by a client to just do something that I think is a little unethical, and I'll try to talk them out of it. But at the end of the day, if the client insists to do something a certain way, you know, I'll do it.
My eldest daughter developed a mental illness. She was very, very clever. She had fantastic jobs, earned big money, used to go overseas a lot. And I used to drive my granddaughter to school, and then coming home, I saw one day outside the hotel, free breakfast. So I took to going in there, and then I saw all the poker machines, and I thought, oh yes, these are these things we brought in. Banks of them. And I'd sort of look at these things, and these poor people, I thought, what are they doing? Why would anyone bother sitting there inanely at 9 in the morning putting money into these things? It looks like the most tedious thing in the world. And then this day I thought, I'll just see why do they do it? And I put my first bit of money in. And it really, although it went slowly, it went from there. In the following year, my daughter took her own life. She had discharged herself from hospital and said she wouldn't do anything to herself, but I went there and she was hanging in the garage and she was dead. And for years, it would just appear, the image would just appear in front of me. And I discovered that the pokies soothed me. comforted, soothed. Yeah.
It was a place where you could just get lost in that world where nothing else mattered. It was like a hypnotism.
10, 9, 8, and you get down there, and after you've pressed that button a few times, you're there. You're in that zone.
You think perhaps this time and press, perhaps this time press, perhaps this time press.
Well, winds come up, okay. That's not important. You press it.
It is solitary, like what I've read of opium dens where people are lying on little mattresses, smoking opium. And they're alone, they're being soothed and comforted.
They're just designed to keep things flowing. So there'll be a bit of a gallop to the sound of the reels going. There's a certain timing to the reel spin and how much they bounce. It's all sort of keep this flow going and being tied to this thing that maybe not necessarily alive, but it's quite vibrant.
One designer said, we want to design math so that you recline on it like a comfortable couch. Another designer told me, people want to be bled slowly. Designers are designing for the zone.
By putting my dollar in those machines, I consented to playing. I didn't consent to unlawful hypnotism. And you don't wake up until you look in your purse and there's not enough there to get another dollar. The panic sets in, the house payment was overdue, electricity was going to get cut off, and there was no food for the boys.
You try to sneak out without everyone noticing, but, you know, the walk of shame, I used to call it. And then the next day, and the no food, and also the no TV or anything like that. I mean, that was all in the hot, you know, like, I didn't own anything.
I've just hurt my family so much. In the financial thing, I've got nothing to leave them.
I kept hearing this phrase, playing to extinction, and I came to understand that what that meant was playing to that point where you've lost all of your funds to gamble. And so that's really held up as the point where you want gamblers to reach.
I don't remember leaving the venue that day. I remember driving down the road with the sole intention of just killing myself. But I found myself holding up a store. I used a knife, and before I knew it, the police were there. The judge, I do remember him saying, "You don't look like the criminal type." to me. So I had a very lucky escape. The clerk of the court lady, she said to me, I know what it's like. She said, I've got a gambling problem too.
There's 200,000 machines in this Pokie nation. And it's the poorest communities who have the most machines and lose the most money.
So this is one of the fastest growing parts of Australia, and it's a fairly disadvantaged municipality overall. There's not a whole lot of pubs and bars, and all of the pubs that do exist have these poker machines. So we're just coming up to the Plough Hotel. Over $50,000 is lost there every day. There it is now. Every machine in the place makes over $200,000 a year. It makes life very difficult for all the other local businesses there. Every one of them could do with a bit of that $18 million if it was spent in their business.
We're in Sydney's West. It's a real crucible, it's a real melting pot. English is not the first language, low socio-eco, so many of the people out here struggle. Our aim is that when the people walk through the door, you know, they walk a little taller. They get called sir, they get called madam, and they get treated with dignity, courtesy and respect. The furniture and fittings here at the club are not what many of the people could afford in this area. However, our aim is that we bring it to the people. It won't cost them anything to come to our club and be a part of the 5-star offerings that we do give.
They were both won before they got there. So we took over the pub with an idea of what it wanted to be, which is a public house. You can take the family, take the dog, take the kids, everybody's welcome to come in, and it's an extension of the community. The Pokie machine is the evil genius, or the person who created the Pokie machine. It is hidden away because it's probably my shame of having them. If you went to a small bar and you said to them, there's $100,000 a year for turning on a switch, it's a tough thing to not want to do. The business is addicted to poker machines.
Well, look, gaming represents a significant amount of revenue. Whilst we are a non-for-profit organisation, we still have to run at a profit.
At Fairfield RSL, about $36 million of its $39 million annual turnover comes from poker machines.
From my perspective, the more money that we can generate through gaming, the more money we can put back into the community, the more money we can put back into the asset and benefit the members.
There's $12 billion in losses that pour through these machines annually to the gambling industry, and around half of it comes from addicted players. That money goes to clubs, to pubs, to casinos, to companies like Woolworths and Coles, who together own 15,000 machines. But governments are the biggest addicts of all, relying on Pokie taxes for 5 to 8% of their state-raised revenue.
I've got to pay for the schools and hospitals with the revenue wherever I get it from, and gaming is part of that.
Every premier who initially started out against pokies, Bob Carr was one, is taken aside by Treasury and shown there will be so much more revenue, easy revenue.
I now declare it open.
This is just political gold. It is pain-free. But this is just a ruthless transfer of wealth from the poorest postcodes to the gaming industry and to the government.
Matthew, how are you? Matthew. Peter. Garrett. You were spot on.
I came into politics in 2004 to a seat where clubs were well established. Before the election, I went to a Meet the Candidates event, which included representatives of clubs and hotels, and one came over to me and said, you know, we're looking forward to supporting you, handed over an envelope, which I unthinkingly took. I thought it might be literature or something like that, but it was a cheque, and I gave it back. But it was clear to me that the connection between clubs and hotels and politics was quite an intimate one.
Government and industry run a joint policy which takes focus off the machine and say it's up to the individual to gamble responsibly.
We all believe that we should do more to help those with a terrible affliction. It damages them and their families, and we understand that. So we think that it's a human problem that needs a human solution.
I would think I'm the only stupid person in the world. Why can't I stop when I'd be waiting for the doors to open at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is late now? But there were other people there with me, and they were waiting for the doors to open too.
So this whole discussion of responsible gambling, I mean, you hear that, and if you don't know a lot about it and what's behind it, you think, great, you know, who's against responsibility? Great. But you have to understand that it's a concerted public relations campaign, appearing to be responsible for the customer base and also putting responsibility on the customers and off of the products. You know, as long as I put little signs about the toll-free numbers to call if you have a problem, then I'm good, right? And it's all on the gamblers. And what isn't then done is any attention paid to how the machines work. That whole conversation can be shut down.
There's very strict guidelines around the way we serve people with alcohol, responsible service of alcohol. You can't serve somebody to the point of being intoxicated. You have to ask them to leave, otherwise you get a whopping great fine. For somebody to be excluded from gaming from my venue, they have to fill out a form, send it away with a photo, then that photo comes to me. But until that point, they're free to gamble till their heart's content or their wallets are empty.
I'm not irresponsible by nature. I went through a massive crisis. It's not to try and absolve myself of a degree of personal responsibility. I have to take that. We all do. But those machines are so powerfully built that they're built for addiction.
The DSM has been the Bible of psychiatric medicine for over 60 years. In its latest edition, published after 10 years' research, gambling disorder was moved into the substance abuse chapter. It was the first time in the DSM's history a non-substance was listed alongside nicotine, heroin, and cocaine.
There is some evidence that there are withdrawal symptoms from gambling disorders, similar to what you see with withdrawal symptoms from some substance use disorders. Often people with gambling disorders make repeated but unsuccessful attempts to try to reduce their gambling. They keep failing at that, and they keep ending up back at the Pokie machines.
As the weight of evidence was stacking up, a major independent report recommended changing the machine so that the maximum bet on a poker machine should be reduced from $10 to $1. That the amount of cash players can feed into machines at any one time be reduced from $10,000 to $20. And that with high-intensity games, people should pre-commit to how much money they want to spend before playing. For the first time in Australian history, it looked like the federal government was going to step in, proposing legislation to minimise poker machine harm.
The majority of people in my electorate wanted some form of change. The new machines were much better designed. They were able to suck money out of people much more easily. I didn't want to ban poker machines, but I just didn't want to see people as social wreckage as a consequence of their use of poker machines. Let's find that middle way. But in my electorate, from the club's point of view and the hotels, this meant war. And they basically declared war on the reforms, and then they declared war on me.
This is about telling MPs at the local level that there is a real consequence locally of killing your club.
Clubs bussed in about 400 members and staff to kickstart a series of rallies targeting marginal seats.
Of all the lobbying I've seen over 17 years of public life, I think the gaming industries do it best.
The clubs had the opportunity to go and see how other groups operate similarly. A group like the National Rifle Association in the United States.
Put it on. Wear it around. The job now is to get all of our clubs covered in It's an Australian posters and coasters. Thank you very much. Ultimately, we will spend as much as we need to.
They've cleverly turned it into a debate about something else.
Sure enough, it came from the pubs and clubs. I guess what surprised me was the casinos coming out to play. James Packer was like silk, but he still had that sting in the tail, which was, you know, your policy needs to be my policy.
Why would you, as a government, be proposing a policy without having the vaguest idea whether it would work? I mean, why?
There is a long tradition of politicians and staffers ending up as lobbyists on behalf of the gambling industry. These people have enormous connections into government. They know everyone.
Casinos, pubs and clubs aren't just lobbying the Labor Party and the Liberal and National Party. They are embedded in the Labor Party and the Liberal National Party.
For a proper government and not a couple of spibs like that.
The hysteria that was whipped up just gave you insight into how difficult it was going to be to make a change. These people who were making all the money and alongside that seeing the human misery that came with it dug their heels in and said no, and then fought like fury, and unfortunately, for the time, they actually won.
The federal government buckled and the reforms collapsed.
When you think of the politics behind protecting this machine, this is a political failure. And the spread of pokies, in my view, in Australia, is really a racket. It's a racket run by people protecting a predatory, addictive product.
I'm trying to stay out of the hotels. I can honestly say they've destroyed my life, and I just really want it back, you know. I think to myself, gosh, you're 45, you know, 20 years of, who does that?